Good to see each of you here this evening. We're mainly going to be studying from John chapter 9 tonight. John chapter 9, we encounter a miracle that stands out, perhaps amongst many of the miracles, because it is a pretty amazing story. But it is the only miracle in the Gospels that I can recall anyway, that the sufferer is said to have been afflicted from birth. In the book of Acts, we read about people who suffered sickness from birth, the lame man there in Acts chapter 3, or the cripple at Lystra in Acts chapter 14. But as far as I know, it's in this gospel account is the only one we know that one has been so afflicted. And so when we think about this account in John chapter 9, this man who's been blind from birth, it is a familiar story. It goes throughout this whole chapter, this encounter, and is one that's very interesting. The chapter really portrays what happens when the light shines, which is kind of what our title is based on. Jesus is talked about here in this passage as being the light of the world. And when we see Jesus coming into contact with this man, we see that he really is able to shine. Some are able to actually see like this man. And even though he's born blind, great things are able to be had because of him. And then there are, of course, others who think they see, but they don't see nearly as well as they think. And they are, in fact, blind as the light is shined on them. And so for that reason, the scripture reading was from Psalm 36, thinking about in your light we see light, because that speaks a lot about this particular passage. We're not really going to cover the entire chapter. We're going to focus mainly on the first 7 verses, this interaction that Jesus has with this man. There's a lot to be said, of course, about the whole chapter, but when we think about this encounter that Jesus has, it is very unique and it is very interesting in the light of what goes on here. So let's talk about this man who was born blind. Verse 1 of John chapter 9, it says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. So Jesus passes by. We don't really have much more information than that as far as the time and the place of the encounter. If you go back a couple chapters to chapter 7, we know Jesus has been in Jerusalem during the Feast of Tabernacles. And if you skip on ahead to chapter 10, we know that there's the Feast of Dedication that's going on. So somewhere in between those two is when this takes place, this interaction between Jesus and this man. But here particularly, we just know that Jesus sees this man as he's passing by, this man who's been blind from birth. So an interesting question comes up here. Who sinned? Why is this taking place? Who sinned, this man or his parents? This is the question that the disciples ask. They are wanting to know about this man and his situation. And I don't know about you, but that's always kind of been an interesting question, especially the part about, this man sinning. It's like, well, he wasn't even born. How is he responsible for this? But understand that the Jews always connected suffering with sin. And they assumed that whenever there was suffering, there was some kind of sin involved. And their rabbis, of course, taught about that. And we're familiar with a lot of these passages like Ezekiel 18 and verse 20, the person or the soul who sins shall die. The son will not bear the punishment for the father's iniquity, or the father bear the punishment for the son's iniquity. The righteousness of the righteous will be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked will be upon himself. But the idea there being there's no death without sin, and so there's suffering here that's connected with sin, and that seems to be something that was often thought of. Also, the idea of there not being any suffering without guilt. Psalm 89 and verse 32, I will punish their transgression with the rod and their iniquity with stripes. And so this was a pretty common thinking along the lines of the Jews, that suffering was connected with sin. So it seems like a pretty reasonable conclusion then. Who sinned? Is it this man that sinned, or was it his parents? And still it makes you think about how could this man have sinned? The idea of a prenatal type sin is kind of mind-boggling to us. But there's some interesting writings that people base their conclusions on. One such reasoning comes from Genesis chapter 4 and verse 7, whenever God is having that conversation with Cain, and he says, sin is crouching at your door. And so the idea that some of the rabbis had was that, sin is just waiting right there, waiting right outside the womb. Just as soon as you are there is sin. And so they would have a connection of sorts with that type of thinking. Also, Genesis chapter 25 and verse 22, when Rebekah is pregnant with Esau and Jacob, you remember the twins are struggling. They're struggling with each other inside the womb. And so that struggle between these two brothers was talked about sometimes and treated as if there was sin that was involved there. Now, we wouldn't agree with either of those ideas, but it does show that kind of thinking, that kind of connection with some sort of a sin that would enable the disciples to even ask the question, was it this man that sinned that caused this, or was it his parents? Of course, the idea of the father or mother sinning in sort of some way that perhaps the mother's expecting and committed some terrible sin, and that being the reason behind that. The idea, of course, is in the scriptures that children could inherit consequences from their parents' sin. We read about that even in the giving of the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. When he tells them not to serve any other gods, and tells them that if they worship them, I'm a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children in the third and fourth generation, emphasizing the seriousness of what he's talking about. And yet we know there are some consequences many times for sin. David, talking about his adversaries in Psalm chapter 109 and verse 14, said, "Let the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord. Do not let the sin of his mother be blotted out." And so they would take things like that and make a point about the consequences of sin. And again, the thinking, was it this man who sinned, or was it his parents who sinned that caused this? We do find connection in the scriptures between specific illnesses or experiences of suffering, sometimes connected directly with people's sins. We see Miriam, for example, in Numbers chapter 12, whenever her and her brother Aaron speak against Moses, you remember God strikes her with leprosy, and Aaron pleads with Moses to intercede on their behalf. King Uzziah in 2 Chronicles chapter 26 did some good things, but he starts having this prideful attitude about him, and then he goes into the temple to burn incense, and he's confronted by Azariah the priest and 80 other priests with him, and they're saying, you can't do this. And boy, he's mad, and he gets ready to kind of lash out, and he's struck with leprosy there, and he had it till the day of his death. Of course, Ananias and Sapphira, a lot of different examples of there being some connection with sin and disease or sickness. But that is not the case here, as the disciples ask this question, because Jesus goes on to answer that. It was neither this man that sinned nor his parents. So we don't really have to wonder about that, what the connection is. Jesus says it's not the result of this man or his parents, but rather he says at the end of verse 3 that it is so the works of God might be displayed in him. And so that's interesting, of course, to consider as well. What this man's going through is going to be an example, so much so that we're talking about it today, however many years later, because it is that kind of an example. But it also makes you think about the works of God being displayed in him, or the works of God being displayed in us, for example. Whenever there is affliction and sorrow, whenever there's pain and suffering and loss that goes on in our lives, it is oftentimes an opportunity for God to be in display or on display in our life. The things that we hold to be true and the things that we hold dear to us, how does that come out of us whenever times are difficult? And you often wonder sometimes when trouble and problems and loss happen on someone who doesn't even believe in God, how do you bear such a thing? How do you go through such hardship on someone who doesn't even have a relationship there? That could easily be the end of someone. But it should be the case whenever we have hardship and problems and all that, when it's somebody who has that connection with God and has that relationship with Him, it should bring out something of us that is greater than what we see in this world, and bring out something about our heart that is shown because God is there and God is seen in the life that we are living. And so whenever we have trouble as Christians and we have pain and affliction, God often can use those things as a means for glory for Himself and for helping people that we come in contact with in our lives. And we need to think about that, of course, as we go on throughout our lives, because to help someone in need, is to show something about God in the life of someone that we're helping. It is showing the kind of people that we are and who it is that's really important. After all, that's what God does for us. He shows us grace and mercy and love. How is it that we should be acting towards other people? And so it just makes you think a little bit about that whenever it's the works of God going to be displayed in this man. All that he's gone through was with a purpose. And I'm sure up until this time, if you were to ask him about that, he probably didn't see a whole lot of purpose there, because there was a lot of difficulty in his life. Jesus goes on to say, we must work the works of Him who sent me as long as it's day. God gave us time. God gives man the day for work and the night for rest. And when that night, or when the day comes to an end, it is time to stop. It is time to take a break from the work. But Jesus said, night is coming in which no man can work. And so there's a time that's coming that Jesus was not going to be continuing on as he had been. There was a time that he needed to press on in his work, and that's exactly what he was doing, because we know for Jesus the cross was at hand. It wasn't going to be too far off down the road. And so then Jesus makes this statement about, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And it just makes you think about this conversation between day and night and what the reason for all these things are. And Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And when you consider that, it just makes you think about the time that we do have and the things that we are living for and what it is we hold as important. When he continues to live out his life up until the cross, you think about what he has on his mind. He's thinking about that glorification of God. He's thinking about the glorification of himself as he's going to ultimately die and then resurrect and ascend back to the Father. But during the time that he's here, he is the light of the world. And there's things that's happening while he's teaching and while he's going around from place to place. And that light that he is exposes the world for its sin. And he talks a lot about this in the 3rd chapter of John. But verse 20 of John chapter 3, everyone who does evil hates the light and does not come to the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. Jesus, being the light of the world, what did he do? He exposed evil. He exposed sin. People were able to see those things based upon who he is and what it was that he was doing. Being that light of the world showed people what that sin exactly was. The light of the world judges the world through the word that he speaks and the life that he lived. John chapter 3, again in verse 18, he who does not believe in him has been judged already, because he's not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. That's what God wanted, was for man to believe in the Messiah, believe in the Savior, believe in the one that was sent to be the remedy for this sin. And the world is going to be judged not because God has something against everybody, but because people are rejecting him. But Jesus is not coming to judge the world, as we're going to go on to talk about here in just a second, but he wants the world to be saved. But those that are living this way, they're judged already. They're not believing in the name of the Son of God. They're not believing in the one that's been sent. And they're going to be judged based upon the word of the one who speaks life in this world. The light of the world saves the world through the death that he's going to die. And as Jesus said again, verse 17 of John 3, God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but through the world, that the world might be saved through him. And so Jesus came for that very purpose, not just to cast aside everybody, but to actually save those that would follow after him. So you think about all of that. We only have so much time in our life, and we don't really know how much time that is exactly. No, nobody knows the time. We just know that it's shorter now than it was yesterday or even earlier today, but we still don't know how much time we have. But it does make you think about Jesus being the light of the world, and makes you think about what he says about working the works of him who sent me while it is day, because night is coming. There's going to be a time when there's no time left for us to do anything. So what do we do with the time that we have? And we probably shouldn't put things off till another time. We probably shouldn't put things off because we don't know whether we're going to have time or not. But our responsibility as a Christian is to fill up our time, but not just fill it up for the sake of filling it up, but filling it up with things that are good, with our service to God and our service to others, because we just don't know how much time we have. But when it comes down to it, at the end of things, we're all of us going to wish we had spent more time doing things for the Lord and things for our fellow man than we will anything else, because that's not even going to be comparable with all the other things that just go on from day in and day out. But Jesus, being the light of the world, work the works of God and do those things that are pleasing to him. So we see this interaction that takes place here with this man. Verse 6, when he had said this, he spat on the ground, made clay of the spittle, and applied clay to his eyes. And so you think about this particular scene, and he tells this man ultimately to go and to wash in the pool of Siloam. So he makes a little, mud cake of sorts. I don't know how you think about that in a great way, but he applies this to the man's eyes and tells him to go wash in the pool. And I think it's interesting that John points out here that the pool of Siloam, that is translated, it means sent. And from what I understand, the water flowed from the Gihon spring through kind of a hand-dug channel into this pool, and yet this means sent. And when you think about Jesus being the light of the world, think about what the name of this pool means and all of that. I mean, one thing that really stands out in the gospel accounts, and certainly in the book of John, is Jesus talking about how he's sent from the Father. He says time and time again, especially in John 5 and 6, several times in those two chapters, but also throughout the Gospels, where he talks about being sent by the Father. I have been sent for a purpose. This is the work of God, that you believe in he who he has sent, or the one in whom he has sent. And so it's interesting that the spring is named after that very thing that Jesus is. But here we're going to see that they reject Jesus. He is the one that is sent. He's the one that they are to believe in, and his name is that's what the spring means, and that's what he is there to do. And yet he is rejected so many times. But go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And so it says he went away and washed and came back seeing. We don't really know how the man made his way to the pool. We're not told if somebody led him there, or if he just kind of felt his way along, or if one of the disciples helped. We don't really know. We just know that he was told to go away and wash, and that's exactly what he did, and he came back seeing. And I don't know, that's a powerful thing to think about, because just the fact that this man was born blind, well, how would you have described everything to this man leading up till that? Oh, that looks like the clouds. Well, I've never seen clouds. I don't know what that looks like. Oh, it's like the color blue. What does that even mean? You would have no reference for anything. And yet, all of a sudden, this man goes from never having seen anything to seeing things for the very first time. And I mean, that's just amazing. That's amazing to think about. Just this story, how this all plays out. And then this man is able to see for the very first time. I don't know how bright the sun must have looked, or the different colorations that would have come out, or what the man would have even been thinking about, or what he anticipated, or how he always thought about seeing and what it would be like. But it must have really been something, I'm sure. finally putting objects with various sounds that he had heard over the years, and thinking about not having to fumble through life anymore, but actually being able to see, not having to be led everywhere that he goes, but actually being able to go where he wanted to go, being able to see. Certainly his life would never be the same again, but as you know from the story, it's not just because he's able to see, right? His life is not going to be the same because of his encounter with Jesus, the light of the world. And so you think about what goes on after this. And again, this lesson is not really about this whole chapter, but you think about the controversy that's going to take place here. And these first 7 verses are terrific, and seeing that interaction and kind of getting your mind around what is taking place, who Jesus is, what he's accomplishing here, how powerful this is for this man. But we know there's controversy because they recognize this is a guy that's just been sitting there and not being able to see. But look at verse 15. The Pharisees are asking him how he received his sight. And he said to them, he applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Real revolutionary story there, right? That's just a lot of details there that you never saw coming. No, it's a simple story, because that's exactly what happened. It wasn't anything that was just crazy unusual. Well, of course, we know the story. They drag his parents in and ask them about the situation. They don't really want to deal with it. So verse 24, a second time they call the man in who'd been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. He therefore answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. It's just that simple. Jesus, the light of the world. I don't know anything about this guy. I just know I couldn't see before. I did what he told me, and now I can see. And of course, they don't like that answer. They're sure that there's something else nefarious going on there. But when he finally gets to the point of talking to Jesus again, which, he hasn't really seen him before, but you get down to verse 35, Jesus heard that they had put him out, and finding him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered and said, and who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and he is the one who's talking with you. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. That's great. That is great to all of a sudden have this where he knows now. He knows this is the one. Jesus is the one that he had been talking to. Going back to Psalm 36 once again. How precious is your loving kindness, O God, and the children of men take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They drink their fill of the abundance of your house, and you give them to the drink of the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. Jesus is that true light which comes into the world, enlightens every man. And so as we close tonight, think about your life. Is he the light of your world? Is he the one that brings light into your life? That's what we have to be considering. If he is, your life is going to be changed forevermore. Your life is never going to be the same. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because what Jesus brings, forgiveness, salvation, eternal life, all of those things. But on the other hand, perhaps your life is not that way. Perhaps your life is consumed by darkness. Perhaps your life is stained with the guilt of your sin. Understand, thinking about this story with Jesus, Jesus could wash away our sin. Just as this man washed away that clay and mud from his eyes and was able to see, Jesus can wash these things away from our life so that we don't have to live in darkness, but rather we can live in the light. And of course, as Christians, we are to be walking in the light as he himself is in the light. That is our goal. That's what we are trying to do. That's what he desires for us. So tonight, as you think about your situation, we would encourage you, if you're not a Christian, to become one this very evening. Recognize what is at stake. It's about darkness versus light. It's about true sight versus blindness, and being able to have that relationship with the Lord where we can look forward to that home in eternity after this life is over. If we can help you tonight in any way, we hope you'll let it be known by coming forward. Together we stand and sing. Heal at the cross, Christ will be to them.